I'm so glad you guys organized this event because human rights and Facebook are intertwined because for many, many people in the world, Facebook is the internet. Facebook went into communities around the world and offered programs either in the form of direct subsidies for data. So if you use Facebook products, Meta products, your data is free. If you use anything on the open web, you're gonna pay for it yourself. Or in more subtle ways with programs that made sure that their apps came pre-installed on phones that were available. When we look at the obligations that Facebook has taken on by doing these kinds of actions of becoming the internet for people around the world, we can't have discussions about human rights. We can't advance human rights. We can't have safe discourse unless Facebook actively participates and has a cooperative relationship with the public. As I read through their human rights impact report, one of the things that jumped out to me over and over again was that they claimed they wanted to show, not tell. You know, that they came out and said, we support all of these things. We're going to show you our actions. That's the difference that we're doing now. But then when they pointed at the evidence of how they were showing, not telling, I found it really interesting to see where they were being transparent and where they weren't being transparent. One of the parts of their transparency or in their show, not tell sections that jumped out at me was that they pointed at their most viewed content report as evidence that they were being transparent about what is viewed on these platforms. If you go and open the Transparency Center today and you look at the most viewed content report, I encourage you to search for the phrase United States. And that's because the most viewed content report, which is the only portal we have into what is the most consumed content on the platform, is limited to only the United States. The reason why this matters in India, why it matters in countries around the world, is the United States is the safest, most sanitized version of Facebook. When Facebook puts out a most viewed content report, when they link to it in their human rights impact statement saying, see, you can see what's the most viewed content on our system, but they ignore, they hide the fact that you're looking at the cleanest corner of Facebook. It shows you what they're really showing you when they say that they're trying to be inclusive. And the reason for that is I've seen the most viewed content in places that are in conflict. It used to be that the social cohesion team, the team that was responsible for preventing ethnic violence around the world, communal violence, they would do something called a virality review once every 2 weeks. So for each of the countries that were in the tier 1 at-risk countries, they would pull the top 10 posts that were viewed. They'd bring in specialists for that country who understood the language the posts are in, that understood the cultural context. And post after post after post would be horrific. You know, gory images, severed heads, allegations that the opposition had done horrible things to children. And we would sit there and discuss, like, how did this get through? Why was this getting the most distribution? What can we learn from this? And one of the things that drives this kind of behavior is that Facebook's products are designed to give the most reach to the most extreme content. It wasn't a goal when they set out to design them. No one said, you know, we want to destabilize the world. But what they did see was that engagement, that when people receive comments, likes, reshares, that it causes them to produce more content. The only problem was, as they discovered within a very short time horizon of this change back in 2018, was that when you reward content that is able to, you know, provoke a fight in the comments, you end up creating a bias for what content gets the most distribution. In places that already have similar intentions, this can be really, really dangerous because of 2 factors. The first is these algorithms are intrinsically majoritarian unless they are explicitly programmed to not be. So what does that mean? In any place in the world where you have one group that is a large group and a second group that is a smaller group, when the algorithms are trying to assess content, if there is any bias in how those 2 groups are going to react to a piece of content, the content that is going to get the better reaction from the majority is going to get more distribution. I saw this firsthand when I worked at Pinterest, where it was very, very difficult for content featuring non-white people to get distribution. Only about 20% of our users were people of color in the United States. And so when the algorithm said, how good is this pin for eyeshadow? You know, the majority of users were looking for lighter skinned people. So they said lighter skinned content is better. It's not like it was designed to be racist, but it picks up on these patterns. When we apply it in situations that have already internal conflict, we end up seeing that you're not going to allow good speech to answer bad speech. Truth, not misinformation, often gets less of an emotional reaction, less of that clickbaitiness than something that plays on people's vulnerabilities. Combined with that majoritarian aspect, you're going to get a very skewed narrative that gets distributed. The second thing I want to flag, because I know I only have a few minutes, is this question around what happens when content gets taken down. Facebook's report points in many places to how they have an oversight board that people can appeal, that they're transparent about what they take down. Go look in our transparency center. You can see how many times these things happened. But the reality is that they won't give us even very basic data on what content moderation systems exist, in which languages, and the performance of those systems. I have talked to activists around the world, people who are fighting for the rights of women, people who are fighting for the rights of the LGBTQ community, people who are fighting for rights for the environment. And they all say the same thing. Because Facebook has underinvested in having high quality content moderation systems, when people talk about violence against women, when they talk about the language that is used, because Facebook rolled out the bare minimum for these systems, because they won't even let us see samples of how these systems perform, those same activists are having their content taken down. And I've heard this narrative over and over again in languages that aren't English, because those systems get less investment, they get less quality assessment. If we want to be able to have systems where we actually can trust them, where we can have, they say in the report, the fundamental basis for human rights is security. They're not in conflict with each other. If we actually want to have systems that are just and secure, we have to have transparency. The last thing I want to leave you with is, do not let Facebook take any credit for systems where they don't publish stats on how often they actually trigger. I noticed in the report, they said they stood up for things like human trafficking, that they reached out to potential victims, they warned people. But one of the things that I saw while I was at Facebook was Facebook bragged a lot about their eating disorder intervention. That they were contacting people at risk for eating disorders and warning them off, getting them resources. But that intervention only triggered on the order of hundreds of times a day. We're talking like 300, 400 times a day. We need to have Facebook actually be transparent. If they want credit for these interventions for protecting human rights, they need to be transparent on how they actually get used and how often they're actually triggered. So in conclusion, I want to save time for other people who are closer to these issues. Thank you so much for inviting me.